Greetings, agents. Agents provocateur. Your mission today is to take on an impossible belief and flip the script to impossible. If you successfully complete this mission, you will forge a faith and confidence that I'm possible. When you attain and operate out of this consciousness, there is nothing that you will not be able to transform and overcome. This message will self-destruct at the end of this service. Although you can catch the recording on YouTube. Well, good morning, everybody. Oh, let's hear a good morning. Are you still sleeping here at 10:30 in the morning? Some late sleepers here, but it's a beautiful day outside, and welcome to all the people that are, well, we're not recording it online, but it will be online, so hello to everybody watching us on YouTube later on. Again, this YouTube message will self-destruct in 30 minutes. So I want to cover, today is it's Passion Sunday, but it's also for those of you studying Keep a True Lent. Today's theme is overcoming. And so I wanted to look at this idea of overcoming, but not just simply from the fact of, oh, we're overcoming, but what it takes to overcome. And so we begin today in the Gospel of John. And this is a story of Jesus after the resurrection. And of course, we're going to learn more about this through Easter week and of course Easter Sunday when we have our presentation. But I want to take us forward a little bit in this story. So Jesus was crucified. He was in the tomb. He came out of the tomb and he appeared to his disciples. And I can only imagine what they were thinking. I mean, it was almost like, what's that movie, Walking Dead? You know, that show Walking Dead, and zombies are like, ugh. And I can't imagine what the disciples were thinking when Jesus came walking out of the dead. Oh my gosh. I mean, they saw the miracles and everything that Jesus did, and they were witness to it. But coming back from the dead, that's a huge one, right? That's the great mystery. Even though they watched him, they heard about him raising Lazarus from the dead, he comes walking up and he appears to this room with the disciples. And so we begin in verse 19, and he comes back, and again, the disciples are kind of freaking out because the Romans, they took care of Jesus, but they're on the hunt for the rest of the disciples. They're going to get all his friends now, all the rest of his, I call them his agents, kind of like us, or his agents, right? So it starts in verse 19, and let's just take a look at this. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors were locked where the disciples were, for fear of the Jews, those were the people, the religious establishment of the time that were coming after them, along with the Romans. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." So he's a friendly zombie. And after he said this, he showed them his hands. And I imagine they could see his piercings, you know. You want to show him he was real. It was his real body. And then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. He said to them again, "Peace be with you. And as the Father sent me, so I send you." When he said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you can forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." So in this instance, the disciples that were there, they received illumination. They were able to recognize him in the Christ. And as we'll see when we go in this Easter story, a lot of the disciples, some of them didn't recognize him. Mary didn't recognize him at first when she was at the tomb. So it's this idea of recognition of that divinity. And this plays out, the important part of this story is not so much, oh, is it historical fact, was he really risen from the dead? The bigger part of the story is that it again, like the Bible, it tells the story of what's going on inside of us, of our own spiritual growth, and it gives us a pathway to realize that. So we move on, and it says, "But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came." So Thomas wasn't there. And the other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." So he kind of came in after the fact. He kind of came in, I imagine they were just like blown away. They're like, "Oh man, dude, we just saw a dead guy. We just saw Jesus come back from the dead. I mean, can you imagine if you had a friend or somebody you knew come back from the grave and just like, hi, how you doing? Coming through the door. They were probably completely blown away. So here's Thomas. Hey guys, what's up? And they're like, dude, you wouldn't believe what we just saw. You're not going to believe this one. And Thomas was with them, and although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Oh wait, let me digress here. So they told them, the disciples told Thomas, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless Thomas says to the disciples that saw Jesus, he says, well, unless I see the mark on the nails of his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails on the hand on his side, I will not believe. And so they left it at that. And so we all have that doubting Thomas inside of us sometimes, right? Have you ever ordered anything from Amazon? Would you order anything from Amazon without reading the reviews? I always read the reviews, right? We buy things based on the reviews, right? Like I've literally not bought something. I saw something and I'm like, oh, this would be really cool. And then I read the reviews and I'm like, oh, 1 star, reading this. And we don't know where these reviews are coming from or who's writing them. So this is a lot like Thomas. And I'll tell you, thank God Jesus wasn't on Amazon or any of those things that have reviews. So a week later, we continue the story. A week later, the disciples were again in the house. And Thomas was with them this time. And does anybody know who Thomas is? We have a popular term based on this Thomas. Doubting Thomas, right? That's where this came from, was Thomas. So although the doors were shut, they were shut in, they were hiding out, Jesus got in somehow. He had the magic key, or he walked through something, and he came and stood among them. And again, he said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, so he singles out Thomas, and he says, put your finger here. Put your finger here, right here. Right here. Right here. See my hands. See my hands. Reach out your hands and put it in my side. Remember the Roman soldier, when he was hanging from the cross, pierced his side. Don't doubt, he says to Thomas. Don't doubt, but believe. And in that instant, Thomas received illumination. He said, my Lord, my God. And Jesus said to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. So he was giving Thomas, at this point, an object lesson. Believing is seeing. Not seeing is believing. Believing is seeing. Hello. You can come in. Anyway, seeing is believing is seeing. So we see from our belief. And what he's talking about is seeing beyond appearances. So he acknowledges, he gives Thomas a way, to acknowledge him and receive that illumination. But what he's illustrating to Thomas in this point when he says, blessed are those who have not seen, have yet come to believe, is he's talking about the fourth dimension. And this is the dimension of the unseen. This is really important because, as you see, we're in the third dimension right now. We got walls, we got physical objects. The fourth dimension is that realm of ideas behind what we see. It's that realm of perfection. It's that realm of possibility. Everything is possible. And we all have access to it. This is what Paul was referring to when he said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And we can realize that in this dimension are also the unformed. In the book of Genesis, this is the realm of chaos that preceded creation, where the Word of God came in and said, let there be light. And we have access to this. We have access to this realm of ideas. We've all had good ideas at times, right? And maybe we've had a few ideas that we haven't acted on. But they're possible. They're possibilities in, waiting to be formed, almost like lumps of clay. If I handed you each a lump of Play-Doh, what would you create with it? That's what this dimension is. So that's what Jesus is saying, is he's giving Thomas a lesson, or the disciples, in how to access this. So, are you ready to learn some steps to take we can access this dimension? Yeah. Access your creativity? Yes? Yes. Good. Well, first of all, the first lesson comes obviously in belief. Belief is the seed to faith. Belief is the seed to hope, which leads to faith. Consistent belief. Practicing belief. And aligning our thoughts with that belief. So believing in our thoughts every time. And we can learn this from children, actually. Children are our best teachers. So to access this realm of belief, to access the belief, we can first use our imagination. Imagination is one of our 12 powers, and it is key to accessing this invisible realm. And so Jesus, again, said, blessed are the children. So children have what? They have an imagination. Ask a 6-year-old what they want to be when they grow up. And they'll be like, well, I want to be an astronaut, and I'm going to fly a plane that's also a race car. And then I'm going to race down, I'm going to win the race, and then the car's going to explode and turn into this giant robot. And then I'm going to walk down and so a child will have this just phenomenal imagination. But unfortunately, a lot of times through life, as we grow older and stuff, it gets schooled out of them. But for us, the work is to rekindle that imagination. Go back to the egg, channel that inner 6-year-old that we have, and use your imagination. So when we're confronting something that we can't do, right, that we consider impossible, we can use our power of imagination and say, you know what? What would it be like if I realized it was possible? And to stop throwing those roadblocks, in front. With children, they don't think about all the stuff that has to go into making something happen. They just know it's going to happen. That's what their imagination tells them. It's going to happen. And they also have a sense of curiosity. So they can ask themselves, we can tap into that childlike, curiosity and say, wow, what would it take? What would that be like? And again, to fuel that imagination, to access this divine substance in this next realm. One of the things I did this New Year's is I didn't want to do typical New Year's resolutions. So what I did is I created, and that's where I came up with this idea of impossibility. Because I made a list of all the stuff I told myself, that little voice, that doubting Thomas inside my head. And that's who doubting Thomas is. Doubting Thomas is that voice that says, oh, you can't do that. You don't have good eyesight. You can't do that. You're too old. You can't do that. Or it would take too many steps, or it would take too long. You'd have to go to too much training or too much schooling. That's the doubting Thomas inside your head. And the Christ in you saying, no, believe it's possible, and it is possible. Everything is possible. So I made this list at New Year's, and I called it my impossibility list. And I wrote down all the things I considered impossible. Flying an airplane. I've got really poor eyesight, so that doesn't make for a great pilot. Scuba diving. I've had a bad scuba diving experience. So that Thomas in my head was saying, oh gosh, you're not going to be able to clear your ears. You're not going to be able to do this. So I had a list, and by the time I got done, I had about 2 pages of things. 2 pages of things I considered. And then I flipped the script. I got that inner child going, and I said, well, what if I just said it was possible? In the realm of possibility, what if it was possible? And so I decided to take one thing on the list. Take something easy. I didn't have to take the hardest thing at first. And so I picked scuba diving. And I went ahead and I said, you know what? What if I just took the next step and enrolled in lessons? Because it's something my wife and I had been talking about for years, and it just never happened. So I enrolled in lessons. And I got in the pool. I got equipment. I got in the pool and had some instruction. And somebody worked with me and helped me clear my ears. And guess what? Everything fell into place. And now I'm getting to go into my ocean dives and get certified scuba diving. So I get to cross that off the list. And again, impossible. And when you go into that realm of impossible, you step into that realm of possibility through belief, guess what? You move into the realm of I'm possible. So you just take that little M in front of impossible and you stick an apostrophe and a space between it, and you've completely flipped the script for yourself. I'm possible. It's not impossible because I'm possible, because I am impossibility. So this power of belief is the way we tap into that. We have to believe that. We have to believe it with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back. And there's a part in that movie where Luke is on Dagobah. He goes to meet Yoda for the first time and continue his Jedi training. And in the process of landing, his X-Wing fighter gets ditched in the swamp and it sinks. So he goes through the training with Yoda and he's doing all right, but he keeps having visions of his friends, getting hurt by Darth Vader. So he wants to get out of there. So he goes and he looks and he's freaking out, and that doubting Thomas is there. He's like, oh man, my ship, it's underneath the swamp and I can't get to it and my friends are going to die, and he's freaking out and thinking about all these reasons he's not going to be able to go help his friends. And Yoda says, well, use your training and get the ship out. And he's like, all right, I'll try it. But he wasn't trying out of belief. And he raises his hand, and you see the bubbles on the water, and he's there, and he's raising, and it looks like he's going to pull that thing out of the water, and then R2 starts squeaking, and he loses his concentration, and goes back into the water. And he looks, and Yoda says, try it again. And he says, well, I can't do it. And Yoda says, no, there is no try. There is do or do not. So he tries it again, raises his hand. The ship comes out a little bit further this time, and he loses it. It just sinks, and he's just done by this point. That was his second attempt. He's ready to quit. He lost his belief. He couldn't see himself doing it. And so Yoda steps in, the teacher. A little, 3 foot high, his little ears, and he stretches out his little arm, and you see the water bubble, and the ship comes up, starts breaking the water, and it comes out of the water, and it's floating gently towards both of them, and he lands the ship, and you could just see him just with his eyes closed, and he's just one with the force, one with nature, or we say one with God, one with Christ. We're in that flow. And Luke was sitting there dejected on a rock, and he was sulking. He was sulking in his unbelief. He was just sitting there, and he looks at Yoda, he looks at the ship, and he says, I don't believe it. And Yoda says to him, that is why you fail. So that's why we fail. We don't believe. We don't believe it. And again, the story I shared in the Bible, if you believe people, Jesus actually resurrected himself from the dead or not, that's not the most important point of the story. Although I imagine it is possible. Charles Filmer believed it was possible to completely regenerate our bodies, holding that belief, that perfect pattern in faith that we could actually heal ourselves. And he actually went further and said Jesus actually had resurrected himself or had his body resurrected before he was killed on the cross. So whether we believe that's true or not, or historical fact, the most important part is we can take that, those ideas, those divine ideas, right, of of resurrecting ourselves via our thoughts. Be ye renewed by the transformation of your mind and your thoughts. That's how we cultivate that belief. And I think I've said it here before, that belief leads to a consciousness. They're like living bricks. Fueled by thought and emotion, we build a consciousness, and pretty soon, these miraculous works, they're not miracles anymore. They just are normal occurrences in our life. So again, cultivating a consistent belief leads to a hope and a strong faith. We can use our imagination like children, right? Use that power of imagination to envision the possible. We can make a list. We can start with a list and list all the things in our life that we're trying to do that we consider impossible, that we can't do, that somebody's told us we can't do, that people in the past have told us we can't do, our own thoughts tell us we can't do. And we can move beyond those. So, your mission today is to take on the impossible belief and flip the script to impossible. And if you successfully complete this mission, you will forge a faith and confidence that I'm possible. When you attain and operate out of this consciousness, there's nothing that you will not be able to transform or overcome. So I'd like you, in closing, to repeat the affirmation we said in our meditation. And that affirmation is, I am impossible. Let's say that 3 times together. Ready? I am impossible. I am impossible. I am impossible. And I am possible. Blessings, everybody. And go forth into the realm of possibility. Namaste.